First of all, we want to welcome you for coming to the meeting and showing an interest in being a member of the Davenport School Board. And I'd like to begin tonight with introductions. I'm Ken Crumweedy. I'm presently on the board. I've been on the school board for 9 years. And when I ran, I had just recently retired from the Davenport School District. Oops, forgot about the mic. I had worked in the Davenport schools for over 30 years. So I thought I knew a lot about the school district, but once I got on the board, I realized there's a lot I didn't know, and I certainly didn't know a lot about the roles and responsibilities of board members. It was an advantage sometimes to know the school district, and then it was a disadvantage sometimes to know the school district. So anyway, I've been involved with the district for over 40 years now, and my wife is also a retired teacher from the Davenport School District. My kids are graduates of the Davenport School District, so I've been in the district a long time.
Thank you. And I'm Nikki DeFow, and I joined the board in 2003. And I will reiterate what Ken said. You know, there's a steep learning curve when you join the board, especially as it relates to budgets and how funds are expended. And so there really is a learning curve that's involved. And because of that reason, we did want to give the opportunity to people to come and learn and maybe gain a little insight as to what the job entails. I have 4 children, 3 of whom have graduated from the Davenport schools, and a daughter that is currently going to be a junior at North. So by the time all is said and done, I will have had children in the school district for 21 consecutive years before my youngest graduates. So it's a long time, and 13 straight years of middle school, mind you. So it can be done, but it can be a little rough. So welcome. Anyway, we're glad that you're all here.
And then we have Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Carruthers, Board Secretary. Okay, now, the reason, let me explain. We know that you can hear us without using the mics, but we have to use the mics because we are recording the workshop tonight. So it's available for people who can't make it. So that's why we're using the mic, because it can't pick up the sound without the mics. So after tonight, it'll probably just take a couple of days for Joe to get it online, and it'll be on our website. So anyone you know that might be interested, you can direct them to the website. I'm the board secretary treasurer, and I'm sure that I've either talked to you or emailed you. And I will be the one that you'll be turning your nomination papers into. So glad you're here, and hope you learn a lot.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Nikki. We want to bring to your attention, and you probably are aware, that there are 4 seats open this year in the Davenport School District. Nikki and myself will not be running again, so those are 2 seats. Ralph Johansson, who's presently our president of the board, his seat is up. However, he is running again, and also Linda Hayes, who is our newest board member, who came in and filled Bill Sherwood's seat, who passed away. She is also going to be running again. But there are 4 seats that will be voted upon in September. Our workshop tonight, we really have 2 different sections or areas that we're going to talk about, and Nikki and myself are basically going to talk about the roles and responsibilities of the school board. And Mary is going to talk about being a candidate, the types of forms that you have to fill out, and just all the campaigning kinds of stuff and finances involved with that and so forth. In your packets, you have several pieces of information, but one of the things I want to draw your attention to, you have the Iowa Association of School Boards Guide for School Board Candidates. And we're going to be referring to that as we share information this evening. Our board belongs to both the Iowa School Board Association and the UEN. And the UEN are the 8 largest school districts in the state of Iowa. Plus now we have, and I'm not even sure what we call them, but I think there are 11 of us altogether. They're smaller districts, but they're not part of the original 8. But if you hear that UEN, that's the larger school districts. They have their own organization, and then there's the Iowa School Board Association, and we belong to both of those. We'll take, after Nikki and I finish, we're going to take questions, so we ask that you save your questions till the 2 of us finish, and then ask us questions if you have specific questions that you want to ask, and then we'll turn it over to Mary, and Mary will provide the information that I had shared earlier. So the purpose of this session is I'm a member of the Legislative Resolutions Committee of the Iowa School Board Association, and we present resolutions to the entire body of the Iowa School Board Association. And one of the things we talked about last year were 3-year terms versus 4-year terms, because the seats that are up are 4-year terms. Now in Iowa, they're all 4-year terms. And so we actually had a resolution to switch that back to 3-year terms. Anyway, in our conversation, we started to talk about people coming new onto the board. And I kind of spoke from experience. As a person who's been in the district for a long time, I thought I knew a lot about school boards until I actually got on the school board. So we want this to be a workshop to help you get a better understanding of what being a school board member is all about, and then to think about it and say, yeah, that's really what I want to do. And also, it's a workshop that will help you, hopefully, to be better candidates, to have a better understanding what this role is all about. And then, of course, Mary's section is to help you better understand all the paperwork that's involved, the finance, the campaigning, all those kinds of things, because it does get very complicated. And when Nikki and I ran, it's like we're pretty much on our own to kind of figure those things out. So that's why we're doing this evening, and hopefully it'll help. I want you, at this time, if you would, I want to talk about the roles of board members. And I think I just, well, I thought I had another sheet here. If you take the Iowa School Board Association packet, and if you would turn to page 5, and the Iowa School Board Association has really done a nice job of outlining what the traits of effective board members are. And the first one there listed is to have an understanding that you're a board member who is, you're a board member who's serving all students in the community, not just a section of town, but you represent all families, all children attending the Davenport schools. We also talk on the board about we represent all children in the state of Iowa, because we really do work very hard to, especially, I'm certain you've heard about the funding issues and so forth. We work for funding for all children in the state of Iowa, not just Davenport schools. So one of the things to keep in mind when you're running is that you're running to represent all children in our school district and in our state. There are certain roles and responsibilities, and Nikki's going to talk more about responsibilities, but I want to talk a little bit about your roles. I think in your packets you have, do you have a copy of the vision and goals and belief statements? Okay. Well, we as a board set goals and what we call our priorities. And we basically this year have 2 priorities. Right there. And one is poverty, the whole poverty issue. And it reads, direct and support actions, programs, and activities which reduce the impacts of poverty on our students, their families, and our community. And the other one is to provide leadership and direction to improve the overall learning environment in our classrooms, our schools and district, including the health, safety, security, and happiness of students and staff. And we talk about this at every board meeting. This is really one of the things that we open with. So people keep in mind what our priorities are. Those priorities may change as boards change, but right now those are the priorities that we have. In setting our goals or priorities, we want to make sure that we create the conditions to help carry out those priorities. So, for example, the poverty priority that we put together a committee, our poverty committee, which is made up of, there were about 40 folks on it from across the district, from several organizations, and so we weren't just doing this by ourselves, but also we involved the community, and they helped us in getting a better understanding of what the needs are in Davenport and of course in the Davenport schools. And then we also spent time as a board in a book study, getting a better understanding of what poverty is all about and some of the issues dealing with poverty. So we try to create those kind of conditions to carry out those goals and priorities that we set. And then, of course, we hold the system accountable. We set the priorities, we set the goals, we hold the superintendent and the school district accountable for carrying those things out. Building public trust is one of your roles as a board member, and making sure that you work with the public because they're the folks that elect you. And so we have had, over the 9 years that I've been on the board, we've had several open forums having to do with different kinds of issues, boundaries, for example. We had several forums dealing with that, and public came forward and gave us information about their wishes, and not that we always carry out everything that everybody wants us to do, but we get their information and then come back as a board and make those decisions. I already talked about learning together, and that's a conversation that we've had over the past year about being a learning board. And so now one of our board members is actually our leader in staff development for our board. And hopefully that'll continue for future boards. Of course, acting with professionalism and integrity, and then committing the time and the energy to be a board member. And we don't want to scare you out, but this is going to be a 4-hour meeting because we want you to get a good taste of what a real board meeting's about. I'm just kidding. Mary gathered this information for us, and from May of last year to May of this year, we had 56 regular board meetings. Now those, And committee of the whole?
Well, it's regular committee and all the extra.
And all the extra? Oh, okay. So that includes committees?
No, that includes special call,
Okay,
workshops,
okay.
that kind of thing.
That,
Closed
those,
sessions, expulsion meetings,
okay,
yeah. All meetings that have to be posted with minutes,
okay.
yeah.
That did not include committee meetings, and there are several committees also. The standing committees are the policy committee, and Nikki has chaired that for several years. And we have another standing committee, the Legislative Advocacy Committee. And then if you are president or vice president of the board, the way it stands right now, the president and the vice president and the superintendent are also on the agenda committee. So they set the agenda, which all board members have an opportunity to give input into the agenda, but they also meet separately. And then there's community meetings. There's meetings with the city. There's meetings with the county, governmental meetings, which usually is the president or the vice president, but sometimes they can't make it, so someone else steps up to cover that situation. And then I mentioned there's also forums, or there's other community activities that go on that you're invited to. And you certainly can't be expected to attend every one of those, because it's like it would be a full-time job. But that kind of gives you an idea of the time commitment. Our board meetings, what would you say, Nikki? 3 to 4 hours?
Easily.
Yeah.
Especially in the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
We easily are here 3 to 4 hours every Monday evening.
Yeah. So it is a pretty good chunk of time that you devote to the board. So with that kind of gives you an idea of the roles. And now I want to talk a little bit about board operations. On pages 5 and 6, it kind of covers that, but I want to talk a little bit about our president of the board. He's the person, or she's the person, who leads all of our meetings, of course, using Robert's rules. And if Ralph, who's presently our president, cannot be there, then Rich Kluhl, who is vice president, steps up to take that position. Like I mentioned, the president is also, and the vice president, are people who set the agenda and determine what we're going to talk about in board meetings. President's responsibilities also, he has a lot of responsibilities beyond the actual board meetings, out in the community with other groups, intergovernmental things, legal matters. He's the person that meets with our attorneys, and there's quite a few responsibilities, of course, after we finish, and we think sometimes it's a long time sitting here for 4 hours, but then Mary hands him a stack of forms that he also needs to complete and sign. So it's a pretty huge commitment being the president of a school board. Just to make you aware, for several years, up until, what's it, a year ago, we received packets of information, and I mean packets of information, every Friday afternoon delivered to our doors for the Monday evening board meeting. We no longer do that, so you don't have to worry about the packet coming to your house. It's now all on board docs, or we have a program, it's all on the computer, so you don't have to worry about that. So you're issued a computer, and of course you'll have a district email. And just a word of caution, you have to be very careful about emails, for example, because if 3 of you, for example, or 4 of you, whatever the majority of the board is, that is considered an open meetings violation. So you have to be very careful about those kinds of things. Um, and then also all your personal information, your address, your telephone number, that all becomes now public information. So anyone can give you a call and have a conversation with you about issues or things that are on their minds.
And they will.
Yes, and those emails, of course, if ever there's an issue, they can be subpoenaed. So just want to make you aware there. I want to talk a little bit about conflict of interest. Need to be a little careful, even if it's legal. It's sometimes perceptions of people that cause some issues. And I'll give you an example, personal example. Of course, my spouse was a teacher in the district once I had retired and got elected to the school board. We had another school board member who his spouse was was an employee of the district, was a teacher in the district. At the time the two of us were on the board, there was an issue across the river with school board members who were previous employees in the district, and issues with their retirement funds. And anyway, they were asked to leave. They could no longer serve on the school board. Legally, that could happen in the state of Iowa, okay? So just because my spouse was employed by the district, that didn't prohibit me from being on the school board. But both Tim and I stepped back from such things as negotiations. So when our board was talking about teacher contracts and teacher negotiations, we felt that was a conflict of interest, and we stepped back because of our spouses being involved. So you have to be aware of that, although it's legal. And I did contact the Iowa School Board Association, and they said, yeah, it's legal. But there's perceptions, and our attorneys also said that also. Because, we could have said, well, yeah, we want a larger retirement annuity, those kinds of things. So anyway, that kind of covers the things I wanted to talk about. And Nikki is going to talk now more about your responsibilities as a board person.
Let's turn it off a minute so it doesn't. So before I get started on the section that I'm responsible for, I just wanted to touch a little bit on a couple things that Ken mentioned, just to give my perspective as well. And in regard to the time commitments, it is what it is in terms of the number of meetings that are scheduled and the myriad of opportunities you will have to be in the schools. The students, the teachers, the principals, they love to see us in the building. They want to know that we are aware of what they are, who they are, and what they're doing. So they love for us to come in and to be able to give us tours or share with us their newest innovation. But as Ken also mentioned, there's only so many hours in the day, and people recognize that there are other commitments that you have. And so the board president is always very flexible in regard to evenings as well. You may see in the paper, Nikki DeFow was not present at this meeting. Well, yeah, it was my daughter's 16th birthday. I wasn't here that night. So with the commitment, there's also recognition that we all have families and home life and work commitments and things of that nature. So, I think we're always very conscientious and generally choose to be here than not, but there's certainly time and opportunities for you to be away when needed. In terms of the agenda, yes, the president, vice president, and superintendent set the agenda. However, any board member can request that an item be placed on the agenda or that an item be brought forward for discussion. And if you've ever watched a board meeting on YouTube now, or been present at a board meeting, you will notice at the end of the evening, the president will ask, are there any board requests? And more often than not, there are. And then those are read into the public record so that people know, what topics might be coming forward in the future. And then they're given either to the superintendent to maybe respond via report, or it's put on the agenda committee's agenda for discussion so that it can be scheduled at a future meeting. Also, in regard,
Just interject
sure.
something there. And one of the reasons it's at the end of the meeting is that you have a section at the beginning of the meeting called open forum, where community members can come forward and express a concern or bring up an issue or whatever. And then at the end of the meeting, then if I feel that we should be looking into it, I can fill out a board request. I'd like more information about this issue. So that's the reason. But during open forum, you don't interact with the person bringing up the issue.
Right, and that's always, it's hard to listen to somebody come before you, make an impassioned plea about something that's going on that they feel strongly about, but Iowa open meetings law prohibits the board from talking about anything that isn't on the agenda and published, because as a community member, you have the right to come and be present and to express, your opinion in open forum or to hear that conversation. So we are legally bound not to have a conversation. So trust me, it can be very, very difficult as a board member to listen to someone make their case and to say thank you for advocating on behalf of your student or your building. Sometimes you will see that the superintendent will point to the back of the room and ask someone to go out and speak to a person who's been in open forum to get more detail or information so that they can follow up. But having been on both sides of the podium in the past, because I was pretty active as an advocate for some issues before I ran, it could be a little frustrating because you think, gosh, are they really listening? They didn't say anything. But can't. So just by way of explanation. In regard to conflict of interest, as an I'm employed at St. Ambrose, and so I will recuse myself from voting on issues that are agreements between the university and the school district. So again, it just kind of goes more towards that conflict of interest. I would look in the next couple months. In fact, we're going to be visiting that policy, especially because the Iowa Code has very specific language in it in terms of conflict of interest, and if you sit on a governing board, what aren't your opportunities to even participate in discussion about a certain item. So we're going to be looking at that and making sure that our policies are as up to date as they need to be. And then lastly, in regard to the emails, there have been in the past, as recently as a couple years ago, maybe 3 now, where Freedom of Information Act requests were filed requesting all correspondence between any school board member and any member of the staff of the school district, and that was during the Madison testing issue that was going on. And just so happens I have a student that is in show choir, had several, so when they asked for any emails pertaining to Madison, all of my personal emails to the show choir director about the Fort Madison Show Choir Invitational were also captured in that Freedom of Information Act request. So, again, another caution, it's not always a correspondence that would be an official correspondence of the district, but your personal emails can get caught up in that too. So just a word to the wise in that regard. So with that, I'm going to move to my section, and mine was responsibilities of a board member. And if you refer back again to the Iowa School Board Association packet, on page 4, there's a little paragraph at the top relevant to responsibilities. And yeah, I'm not going to read through all this documentation because I know that you can do that on your own. But what we really wanted to focus on and we thought was important is to touch a bit on policymaking, fiscal responsibilities, and then our responsibility to ensure that the district is operating under Iowa code, what's stipulated under Iowa code. So that sounds easy enough, right? Just 3 little things. And really the primary function of the board is to be the policy setting body for the school district. We operate under what is a policy governance model, which means we set the policy. When I started in 2003, one of these lovely binders was our policy handbook, just a little light reading for the new school board member. And it was quite a tedious process. Every time a policy was changed, you had to collect the binders, add the pages. This was disseminated to buildings, and so it was a lot of paperwork and quite a bit of a daunting task for the board secretary who was responsible for that. Now, thankfully, we have all of our policies online. Makes it much easier for us to maintain accurate and up-to-date documents for the community and for our staff. In fact, in our policy, it is stated that the only official policy of the board is that which is published online and is available in that manner, because these books have become quite outdated. Also, we've always had this bit of a disconnect between what is what I call big B, big P board policy, and, oh, well, that's board policy. And you'll find if you join the board that you often will find that you have made decisions about any myriad of things, like what size of backpack a student can carry, and how long is passing time, and just any variety of things that you say, no, we did not vote on that, but yet it's one way of explanation to say, well, it's a board policy that this occur in this manner. So because of that, we did put that language in just to clarify, because there were times I was like, not too happy to be being held accountable or responsible for a decision that never made it to the board table whatsoever. Do you want to add something?
Well, you do want to talk a little bit about board policy versus administrative reg.
Sure.
Because I think that kind of spells out that we don't really get involved with daily operations in the school district. That's what we hire superintendent for, and that's what he hires his staff for. And so they, from the policy that is set by the board, then we have the administration put together administrative regs. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Sure, absolutely. And so as Ken said, we establish the policy, and when needed, we will direct the administration to develop administrative regulations to implement the policy. And so things like the anti-bullying policy, anti-harassment policy, policies relevant to dress code, things of that nature. There are explicit administrative regulations that will accompany those policies. The board does not have discretion whatsoever over administrative regs. That is the purview of the administration, and at times can be quite a constant, can not always accept that we have trouble sometimes accepting that easily, I will say. We certainly have asked in the past to see administrative regs, to see how something's implemented, especially when it's a new policy. But at the end of the day, all we can do is advise and make recommendations. We do not approve, and we do not write the administrative regulations for the district. And that's probably one of the, not so much that piece, but the piece that Ken talked about, what's your role as a board member, setting policy versus daily operations. There are many people that will approach us and ask us about a decision that's made in a building, about a a staff assignment, about a curriculum that's been implemented, any variety of things. What size backpack a student's allowed to carry. We do not make those decisions. I mean, if you did, can you imagine, 22 buildings and you're responsible for making that type of decision for every building? It just wouldn't be feasible. Again, that's something that the administration, that's their function. Our job is to hold the superintendent accountable for our policy. So if somebody comes to you and says, this is happening, and I would like you to look into it, your role as a board member is to forward that information or ask them to speak, follow the chain of command, ask if they've spoken to their building administration. If they have you spoken to the Director of Administrative Services? If they have you spoken to the superintendent? And to really, because in some decisions, depending upon what they are, the board is the final arbiter of some of those decisions. And so to get involved or to try and negotiate or mediate those situations really isn't proper or appropriate. Right?
Yeah,
okay.
And that can be very, very difficult, especially if it's a friend or a member of your family or whatever. Because that's not your role.
Mm-hmm.
So those are difficult things.
Right. So also, in regard to the policy, it's, we referenced the Iowa Code, and the Code of Iowa establishes what school boards can and cannot do and what we're authorized to do, from how much money we can spend per student to, rules and policies that we can set. And the state or the school district operates under what's called Dillon's rule. And in essence, what that means is a school district or school board can only do what it's given permission to do by Iowa Code. As unlike the city, which doesn't have that rule, and how they can operate is as long as they aren't prohibited, they can do it. For us, only if you're allowed can you do it. So a good example of that is a few years ago up in Dubuque, they wanted to establish not just a dress code, but they wanted to have uniforms, and so they passed a rule requiring uniforms of their public school students, and they were sued, saying that's not legal. You can't, establish uniforms. And sure enough, what the Iowa Code says is you can prohibit what a student wears. So we can say you can't wear clothing that promotes drug use or alcohol or any of these other variety of things. But you can't tell them what they can wear. You can only tell them what they can't wear. And so sure enough, they were not allowed to have a uniform for their students, but did retain their dress code. So same thing for us. And so we frequently rely on our legal counsel as it relates to policies and policy decisions. As Ken referred to, there is a policy committee, and currently it consists of 4 board members, which is a little unusual because 4 board members does constitute a meeting. And in most cases, a committee would not have 4 board members seated on it. But this spring, or last fall, I guess, in preparation, Ken and I already knew we weren't going to run. I've been on the policy committee more years than more than 10 years. And Ralph, who's also up for re-election, has been a seated member on that board, on that committee for many years. We knew that with my not running, and if he weren't reelected, that would leave a gap in leadership on that committee, and policy the historical knowledge is a great benefit when you're looking at policy, because you only look at policies once every 5 years. We have a review cycle, and so every 5 years, unless something is brought forward to us as a pressing matter, is when we look at those policies. So with that, we invited an extra board member to join so that they could get some experience with the process, what it entails, how we arrive at decisions, and to have a little better succession planning for the next year and the future years. So I don't know, again, as like Ken said, we only make the decisions for today. Yeah, as of September 14th, is that our last? 11th? 9th. See, people say, when are you done? I don't know. So as of September 9th, you know, that'll be somebody else's decision. So it may look very differently at that time.
So with that, with what Nikki just explained, then that becomes an open meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have four board members, or that's the majority of the board, that's like a regular board meeting, and the public can participate in that or observe that.
Right. So because we now have 4 board members, we have an agenda that's posted. We do record the meeting, and Mary does provide minutes for those meetings. And we really have placed a little more structure and formality into it, which can be somewhat cumbersome because you can't, if somebody wants to bring up another item, oh, well, while we're looking at this policy, let's talk about that one. We can't do that anymore because, again, it's an open meeting. We can't talk about it unless it has been posted and publicized so that if somebody wanted to come in and hear that conversation, they were able to do so. So it makes us be a little more on our toes, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The other committees we've talked about, the Agenda Committee, and then the Legislative Advocacy Committee, which Ken has been a member of for a long time. And as you can imagine, that is the committee that we've convened to try and advocate for the school district and our students with the Iowa legislature. And the committee, and you should probably speak to this because you're seated on the committee.
Well, several years ago, we did make that a standing committee. That it's a standing committee. There are, I'll give you an example. When I first got on the board, one of the hot issues in the state was preschool education. And so our Legislative Advocacy Committee worked really hard with preschool parents, especially in this district, to step forward and participated and talked to legislators, went to Des Moines and so forth. And that's just one example of one of the things we've done. So we take issues, and of course the funding issue right now has been huge, and legislative advocacy people and all the board, but especially that committee, we have spent hours talking to legislators, superintendents, board members, going to Des Moines, talking to the governor, talking to the lieutenant governor about these issues. It's a fun committee. It's a frustrating committee, but it's going to be a really important committee to be involved with next year because of that whole funding issue. And so Rich Kluhl has chaired that for several years. Ralph Johansson, our president, has been on it for several years. And it's a great committee, and you'll quickly learn that legislators don't know a whole lot about school funding. And that's another whole issue for anyone running for the board. It's a very difficult thing to understand, the whole school funding issue and how it works. And if any of you run and are elected, I would strongly recommend. The Iowa School Board Association does funding workshops, and it really helps to get a better understanding of what that's all about.
And so the fiscal responsibility or the budgetary responsibility is another, of those biggies that the board is responsible for. With that being said, when we talk about approving a budget in the spring, what we are really approving is the tax levy rate for the upcoming school year. We are not approving, though we talk about it extensively, we are not really approving the funding per line item of, relevant to curriculum or other things. We have lengthy debates, and I'm sure you've heard them, relevant to budget cuts and where are we going to cut. You've heard that conversation for many years now, ongoing. But those really are recommendations to the superintendent. And if you've paid attention, you'll notice that when we have those conversations, he's coming to us saying, these are the areas that I feel we could reduce our costs. And this is the revenue that we could save if we take these steps. And then we have, very lively conversation about those things. We express what we, as board members, believe should be our priorities, and there are 7 different opinions at that table. Honestly, I can't say that there's consensus top to bottom ever, which is not a bad thing. But at the end of the day, that's all we're approving is the tax levy rate, and the superintendent, based upon our conversation and recommendation, will make decisions relevant to the budget. And so, as I'm sure all of you are aware, this year he took a very brave stand and said enough. And I don't want to paraphrase him too much because he said it so well that night. But he said in good conscience, I can no longer propose budget cuts of $3 million. This is not, this is going to hurt our students. And in fact said, not only am I not going to cut the budget, I'm going to add $1 million to the budget because we need it. And it's in the best interest of our kids. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you can ask yourself the question, what's in the best educational best interest of students, and you can answer that and feel good about the vote you made, you've had a successful day as a board member, because that's really what it's about. So he made his bold statement. We worked really hard, and even more importantly, we had parents and students who worked really hard and went to Des Moines and made their voices heard, and we made more of an impact this year thanks to them, because trust me, this has been an issue on our minds for years. But it wasn't listened to until our students stood up and said, hey, I'm not worth less. Why do you think I am? Still gives me goosebumps. I mean, it was great. At the end of the day, we're still worth less. And the bottom line is, what that means is that not this year, because we do have spending authority in reserve of about $8 million. So we can spend that out of that $29 million. We have the authority to spend that. But once that $8 million is gone, we will be faced with spending our reserve that we do not have authority for. And Dr. Tate clearly has said that's his intention. That's a violation of state law. You as board members will be asked to support that decision. And that's a weighty issue. That is a very weighty issue. And so I would urge you and advise you to think about that as you're just making your decision to run. And obviously, you could choose to support that stance, or you could choose not to support that stance. That would be within, your discretion as a board member. But it is going to be a decision you'll have to make and have to face before your term is up as a school board member. Unless, by some miracle, the state legislature sees the error of its ways and decides that our students, in fact, are worth as much as students in our neighboring school district, which would make a $3 million difference in our budget each year. And ironically, in the last several years, what have we cut out of our budget? $3 million. That's pretty simple math to me. So, anyway, good luck with that. And I will be in your cheering section, trust me. I will be in the cheering section because, yes, that's.
But again, when I was talking about legislative advocacy and the things that we do this year, we have made a lot of legislators aware of the issues that didn't know anything about this issue. Also, several school districts, and that's why anybody coming onto the board, you have your work cut out for you to continue carrying that out and making people aware of the issue and getting their support. Because we have to convince some of the lobbyists in this state that it is important for school districts to be able to spend their unspent balance if they need to, and also to increase school funding. It's a serious issue in this state.
Right. So we've talked a lot, a little bit more than we thought we might, but that doesn't surprise me either. And it shouldn't surprise you if you paid attention to board meetings. So I guess what we'd like to do is open it for questions.
Yeah, that last piece was the real bomb. I don't know of any other way to put it. And what's not clear is the implications for board members in supporting or not supporting. Are there legal implications? And I think candidates need to understand that, and I don't know how much people are aware of the background and some of the intricacies. It may bear a separate packet of information on the history of that. But it's a real volatile issue. So I personally, I'm not quite sure. I've heard different things as to, you know, if the school board supports Superintendent Tate in his action in defying the state law, what the impact on the school board is, what the implications are. And I think that deserves some conversation.
She's speaking to you, Mike. Could just press the button right there.
With what he's talking about, could a candidate actually face some legal penalties? Like could you be in violation of the law and like misdemeanor or a ticket, or obviously it's not going to be jail time, but what is the impact of that, or what position would you be in if you said, yes, we need to violate the law to meet our obligations to our students?
Well, I want to say that I'm not legal counsel, and we have not as a board conferred with our legal counsel at this time because it was premature. I certainly would advise the board if you got to that place, or when you got to that place, to speak with our legal counsel and to get a clear understanding. I can only tell you what I heard from the state when Dr. Tate made his statement, and it's probably the same thing that you saw in the paper. We didn't have anything specific, but that board members could be charged with a misdemeanor, because as a board member, you are fiduciarily responsible for the expenses of the district. You know, honestly, when Ken referenced the packets we used to get a printout of every check written by the school district, a listing, from week to week. That's still available to us online, and if we're responsible to look at that, and you will sometimes see, you know, board members will call into question, can you give me a little more detail about this check? And every board meeting, we approve you know, the expenditures of the previous week. So at the end of the day, board members are responsible. Now, would we be, you know, would you be charged? Would you, I can't speculate. I really don't know. And it's, you know, a year and a half down the road, and hopefully something that can be prevented, you know, hopefully something that can be prevented. But it's certainly something that's possible. Other questions? Yeah.
I know you mentioned that you work at St. Ambrose.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Again, it's so that it can be pushed in the middle. There you
Okay.
go.
I know you mentioned that you work at St. Ambrose and you mentioned that you were retired. What about the other board members? Are most of them retired or still working full time? Just curious when you discuss the time commitment.
Well, we have a stay-at-home parent. Director Kluhl is retired from the Army Corps of Engineers. President Johansson is an entrepreneur that has his hands in more things that I can imagine at the end of the day. You know, he owns several businesses, and he just has more on his plate than I can even, it's unimaginable sometimes. Linda Hayes, Director Hayes, works for a couple of local churches, you know, as a secretary, and does some, you know, outreach with students in her time. And Director Snyder is a regional manager of a flooring distribution company. So when I started on the board, I was a stay-at-home mom. You know, re-entered the workforce about 3 or 4 years later. One thing I will say, and I forgot to mention, committee meetings sometimes encroach upon the workday. So the policy committee, for example, starts at 4 o'clock. I work really diligently to have that be done by 5:30. The agenda committee typically meets over a noon hour, as I recall. That's changed. Oh, that's right. So our meetings begin at 6, our regularly scheduled meetings. Agenda committee meets at 5.
Yeah, 5 or 4:30.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there are occasions that we will have expulsion hearings, and those are typically scheduled late afternoon. Those are closed. All in the 13 years they've been here, all but one has been a closed session. And you know, that's something that, that's just another thing, just briefly. I mean, those are really weighty meetings. You know, you're determining what is going to happen to a student, whether or not they're going to be allowed to remain in our schools, usually due to a behavioral incident that may have occurred. Anyway, it's just those are tough. Those are tough. I don't know any one of us that doesn't walk away from those going, gosh, you know, I really wish there were other options available to us. So.
And only the board can expel.
Mm-hmm.
The superintendent and district can suspend children, but we do not suspend. If it gets that to a very serious situation, we're the only ones that can expel a student from that school. I'm done.
You done? Okay. Did that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
Regarding expulsion hearings, they're probably infrequent, but because it's a serious act, what types of things are considered, and what type of interactions do you have with the families or the administrators, where you would have to really understand or be educated about what's going on, or some background on maybe the student or the situation?
Before a student would get to the point of being expelled, there's already been hearings that have occurred and findings of fact from the district in terms of whether or not, the allegation's substantiated or not, and if they think it warrants, making a recommendation for expulsion. Because, and you're right, it happens very infrequently. Half a dozen this year, half a dozen this curricular year, so from last fall to today. So in preparation for an expulsion hearing, you get access to all those materials, which are confidential. Parents and student are invited to attend, and they can, they speak to the board, they give explanation, they can make their case. There are representatives from the administration available if we have questions. And this year there was a more recent interpretation of the law which stated that a family could actually have their entire case reheard if they chose by the board, so that everything that had occurred previously in the hearing could be repeated for the board instead of like the packet being accepted as fact. That's, like I said, that's just a new occurrence, and we really haven't had anybody make that request, okay? But we certainly do have parents and students come in and speak to us, and sometimes those can be highly charged conversations. Once findings of fact have been read and evaluated and people have spoken and the board has the opportunity to ask questions, then everybody's excused from the room except for the board, and then we have our conversation about what we think is in the students' and the district's best interest, because we not only have to protect that student, we have to protect all our students. And sometimes those conversations as well can be quite lengthy. Just as I said, around the board table there are frequently 7 different opinions. So certainly in the case of an expulsion, there can be as many opinions as there are board members in the room. An expulsion hearing can be held with a quorum, so 4 board members need to be present. So you don't need to have the full quorum, or the full board to make a decision about expulsion. So, I mean, those can easily last 2 hours, easily.
I think part of your question was what kind of act? Didn't you start off that way?
I think you explained
Okay.
my question, just the interaction you'd have and
Mm-hmm.
like what the responsibility is
Mhm.
really, and that makes sense to protect. You're an advocate for the student being expelled, and you're also an advocate for the students
Mhm.
in the school.
Right. Susan?
I do have a question back.
Oh,
I do have
yeah.
I do have a question back regarding, that's all right, regarding back to Dr. Tate and, next year having the budget and spending the money. Is there anything in the Iowa Code about if a board member has a misdemeanor that they have to be excused from the board, or can a board member carry a misdemeanor? Is there anything in the Iowa Code about that you could possibly have to step down?
I'm not familiar with it. It certainly wasn't presented, but I'm not aware with the code relevant to that. What I can say is that, the Board of Education at least said that if Dr. Tate was found guilty of violating the law, his license could be suspended. And if his license were to be suspended, he could no longer be a superintendent in the state of Iowa. That's a requirement to be a superintendent. So that's a pretty weighty decision that he made.
Mm-hmm.
It does say it does say in the candidates packet that one of the eligibility factors is, it says an eligible elector may not be a convicted felon. So I think that pretty much covers it.
Of course, there's a difference between a misdemeanor and a felony. Many boards of trustees and boards of directors carry directors and officers liability insurance. And I'm curious as to what level school committee members are indemnified and held harmless in regard to actions that they take as board members.
I don't know that I want to give, all I could do is give you an opinion, and I would, I could tell you that there have been instances in the past where the board has their own legal counsel, and there have been instances where we have availed ourselves of that legal counsel. In terms of insurance, I think that's something we would need to look into, and could post something as a follow-up on the website. Okay, we'll inquire about that.
I can't imagine that there isn't the insurance there, but it's probably something that doesn't need to be talked about very often, I would hope.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not exactly sure, Bob, but I do know that several years ago in our district, we did have a board member who sued other board members. And at that time, I remember hearing that the other board members were covered by that. Now, Dr. Tate has also indicated in his situation that, he would certainly have his own counsel. We have our counsel as board, but he would have his own, and he would assume that responsibility. Are there other questions?
So I'm looking at the policy manual that is out there, and this is all online. At what point are there additional trainings for new members? Are there things like, do you have to go to Des Moines to train with other school districts, board members, or there are these opportunities? Because you talk about getting up to speed.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Does that mean a year? You both been on it for 6-7 years. When did you start feeling comfortable, and what does that actually incur, and where does that work?
And do you want to talk about the training aspects?
Well, I had mentioned the Iowa School Board Association, and because we are members of the Iowa School Board Association, and even if the district would decide not to be a member of the Iowa School Board Association, those workshops are still open to all board members in the state of Iowa. And I would strongly encourage, if you're a person who's just getting on the board, especially school finance, they also have workshops on school board policy. And one of the workshops that happens right away after the election is the Iowa School Board Association. Somewhere in this region, it could be Clinton or Maquoketa, or it could be Muscatine, or it could be Davenport. They will hold a workshop for newly elected school board members to talk about these kinds of things that we're talking about. We felt that it's important that you kind of get a heads up, because it's always after the fact, after you're elected, that you get this information, not before. So that's why we hope that would be helpful for you to decide if you really want to continue being a candidate. Okay?
Good job. And I would say, in terms of comfort level, it takes a year. I think it takes a full year of being, seated on the board, going through a budget cycle, going through, contract negotiations, all of those things, before you really feel like, okay, now it's clicking. Now I'm understanding better. Board members too, can always avail themselves, if you need, of the superintendent. If there's a question or concern about something that's coming before the board, he's very open to talking to board members. And, you know, sometimes when I want to pose a question, I'll send it to Mary and say, can you send this out? So that everybody's aware of the fact I've asked the question, you know, because then everybody gets the same information back, which I think is really important. When I first was on the board as former superintendent, liked to have small group meetings in advance of board meetings, which was legal. You know, there were always less than 4 board members, but, you know, we always make our best decisions when we're fully engaged as a board of 7 people. I can't tell you the times that I've come in and been, what I thought was going to be my decision was completely turned around based upon the conversation that we've had at the board table. You know, that's one of the things, you know, if at all possible, avoid coming in with preconceived notions about a specific, you know, agenda item or topic that's currently in front of the board, because you may find that at the end of the day, what you thought was to be true and accurate may not have been the full story. So, yeah, and don't be afraid to express your opinion. You know, that's another thing that I would say as a board member. Rarely you'll hear a 7-0 vote unless it's a fairly routine matter. But this board has learned to work very well together in terms of being direct, being respectful, but at the end of the day, not letting that impact our working relationship with one another. You know, there are only going to be 6 other people in this whole community that have the same experience that you have, and you really come to rely on 7 plus Mary. Anyway, and you really come to rely on that group of people, you know, and I think we work very well together as a board, I believe. So.
Another way to quickly learn about things, and I decided to do this after I got elected. I right away got on the policy committee because I didn't know a whole lot about school board. I knew some of the school board policies, but really to understand how that works. So that's why I got on the policy committee, and I think I was on there for about 3 years. I got on the legislative advocacy committee to see what that was all about and stayed on that. Because that is a good way to learn about the operation of those committees and exactly how policy happens and the steps involved. So good way to learn. Any other questions? I know we need to get moving to forms and Mary's section on running for the board and candidate expectations. So Mary, it's all yours.
All right.
The other thing we do as a board, besides fiscal responsibility and policy we've talked, hire the superintendent, and we hire the school board secretary treasurer. Those are our responsibilities.
I don't know what it's doing. I think it might have stopped. Oh, here we go. All right. Let me go ahead and put this on. Now this is the dry part. Sorry. But it's important that you fill your paperwork out right, because we have had people had their nomination papers rejected. So it is important to do it accurately. So I want you to pull out your candidate's guide for the school election. And this is going to basically be your guide, your Bible, as far as what you need to do to run. So I'm just going to review some things that I think are important, but I would encourage you to read through this when you get it home. The two documents that you will be responsible for completing are the affidavit of candidacy and your nomination petition. Okay, and you've got two blank, they're in your packets, and I'll be reviewing how to fill these out. So actually tonight, I mean, you could probably end up having everything ready to go and then just go out and get your signatures if you wanted to do that tonight. So you'd have that all done. I think that Ken and Nikki talked about the school election maybe a little bit. That it's odd-numbered years that the school election takes place. So this year, 2015, and then the next odd year would be 17. So this year there are 4 open positions. So the next year there'll be 3. So it's staggered terms, and your terms run for 4 years. Okay. Basically, your candidate qualifications are pretty basic. You have to be a citizen of the United States, a resident of Iowa, and at least 16 years or 18 years old. To run for the Davenport School Board, you have to live in the Davenport School District. Okay? A eligible elector may not be a convicted felon, be currently judged incompetent to vote by a court, and claim the right to vote in any other place. So those are pretty basic. So your nomination papers, that consists of the affidavit of candidacy and your nomination petitions, and these will be completed and submitted to me either in person or through the mail. I would prefer that you bring them in person so I can look at them and review them, make sure that everything's in order. If you decide to mail them, postmarks make no difference at all. I have to have those papers to me by the filing deadline, which is on page 2. The first day to file is July 6th, and the last day is Thursday, July 30th, and the office will be open until 5 o'clock. We have to be open by law till 5 o'clock for me to take any nomination papers. And there's no filing fees in the state of Iowa. Any questions about this so far? Okay, preparing your nomination papers, your affidavit of candidacy. And what I did was just to give you an example here of what it might look like. You've got a blank one there. Is your candidate name, and it takes you through each section. And it's important to read all these because there are some things you might miss that are important and required. So your candidate name has to be printed exactly as you want it to appear on the ballot. They ask for a phonetically to spell your last name. That's because sometimes they have these audio ballots for voters who may be visually impaired. Okay? So, I don't know if I did that right. Is that spelled phonetically? Carruthers? I looked at that and thought, well, I don't know. Your office sought, which would be director, board member, and then the district, Davenport District. The vacancy information. This could be a little confusing this year because some people might think because of the untimely passing of Director Sherwood that you're filling a vacancy, but you're not filling a vacancy. So check no, because Director Sherwood's term would have ended in September, and Linda was appointed in February, and her term, she was filling in for that, the remaining amount of time for Bill's term, which was going to end that will end in September. So you will check no for that. Type and date of election. That's the school on 9/8/15. It's pretty self-explanatory. This section, candidate affiliation, you'll see on page 4, it specifically indicates candidates' party affiliation should be left blank. So why is that, you think?
It's not partisan.
Right. School board election is a nonpartisan.
Then why do they have it in there?
That is for this same form is used for other types of elections. So they're interchangeable. So they use the same form for elections that would be partisan. Your home address, the mailing, you have to provide your house number and street name. That's required. And your mailing address, phone, and email are optional to put on that form, but I would request that you go ahead and fill that out, because if I need to contact you, well, I have your name now from the sign-in sheet, but normally, you know, it's really good to have that because there might be some problems with your paperwork, and if you file early enough, then I can contact you and I'll review your paperwork when you bring it in, but it's just good to have that on there. The affidavit must be notarized. The notary officer must be present when the candidate signs the affidavit, and the notarial officer will complete the verification on the bottom of the affidavit. And once an affidavit is notarized, the affidavit cannot be altered. So, I'm not a notary, but we have 2 people in our office, not office, but in the building, that are notaries. Up on the 3rd floor here, and then there's one on the 1st floor. You could certainly, when you come in, I could call them and see if they're here, but my recommendation would be to have it notarized before you come, because I don't know what their schedules are. But they would be happy to do it if they were here. Any questions about your affidavit of candidacy? Okay. The next is the nomination petition. So, the candidates must collect signatures on these petitions and file the petitions at the same time. So both of these have to be submitted together. And you can access these forms on the website that's listed here in the guide. I have it on the district website. It's available on the Scott County Auditor also has it, that you can download copies if you need extra copies. Because if you'll notice, you have 15 signature on there. So for the Davenport School District, it's based on the number of registered voters, and that determines how many signatures you need. So for Davenport, you need 50 signatures. So you have that header at the top there, and every signature page, every page has to have that information on it, or your paperwork will be rejected. If you want to get a blank piece of paper and put all this stuff down there that's required, you can do that. But what I would do if I was running, I would just make blank copies. Okay, make 5, 6, whatever, and that way you have everything that you need. You don't have to worry if you're missing something. So you would put your name, then the office sought. It should be printed your name should be printed exactly as you wish it to be to appear on the ballot. No parentheses, quotation marks, or titles may be included. Your office sought, again, would be director or board member. And then your school district, Davenport. We are at-large district. That's what we're considered. So we're not director districts. Type and date of election, Tuesday, September 8th. And then the following, this is another reason why you just want to make copies of print out some blank ones. I mean, if you want to write this statement out, then more power to you, but I wouldn't want to do that. But this statement has to appear on your petition page, and that is right there in that small print. The following information should also appear on each petition header: candidate's county and city of residence. And then the vacancy information, again, that would be checked no, because you're not filling a vacancy. 50 signatures, as I said, and I would recommend that you get more than 50, We had a situation a couple years ago before I started where the signatures were challenged and the paperwork was rejected. And the situation with that was the individual had someone, I guess that was, a campaign person was helping them collect signatures, and they were calling on the phone and they wrote down the signatures, and that's not allowed. So he didn't get 50 after those signatures were challenged. The person paperwork was rejected. So I would recommend that you get more than 50.
Can I interject there for just a second? Just so you know, Mary will accept your paperwork as long as it's notarized and completed as it should be.
Yes.
She does not review it for accuracy beyond that.
Right.
She doesn't review the signatures. Any person within our community, though, can look at and review your nominating papers, and that's what happened in that case. Was
Right.
a community member who became aware, I think, that some of the signatures were obtained in that manner, went down, reviewed, called it into question, and we actually had to conduct a hearing here in the board office, and it actually was a decision of the board president whether or not to accept the signatures or not, and again, that was a hopefully once in a lifetime thing that happened, because it was very, very, very interesting, unique situation. But
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it actually says in my filing guide for the filing officer, which I'm considered the filing officer, is I do not review your signatures. I just make sure that you have 50 of them. So it wouldn't be me that would do that. It would have to be a member of the community. So
Does this paperwork get submitted to the state, or
No.
just the county?
to me.
But where do you
But
take
where
it?
do you take,
Where
where
do
does
you
it go
take
from
it?
you?
Oh,
actually looks
oh,
at
I
it.
take it down to the
Is it-
auditor's office, yeah.
Okay.
I give it to Richard down there, and he looks through it. But I was on the phone with him this week, and I asked him, does he review signatures? And basically, he said no. So it really does require a member of the community to question these signatures. So, yes.
So the signatures have to be people that actually are registered voters? Yes
No.
or no? Okay, that's all.
An eligible,
Of the school district.
it's, see page 1 for the definition of an eligible elector. So let's go back to page 1.
Same as the candidate.
Same as the candidate. So you have to live in the school district.
That's an important point.
Yes.
Living in the school district, not just Davenport, because there are parts of Davenport that are in the Bettendorf School District. So when you get your signatures, for example, in East Davenport, out by Crow Creek,
The Lakehurst.
Lakehurst area,
Lakehurst subdivision.
that is Davenport address, but that is Bettendorf School District. So if you get those signatures, they'll be thrown out.
If somebody
If
questions.
somebody's, yeah.
Yes, if somebody questioned it.
So you need to be careful where they live.
Likewise, though, Bluegrass, Buffalo, you know, those areas of the county which are Davenport School District student, those signatures would be valid.
That'd be fine.
I just have a question. Are
Can
the
you,
form-
can you, to the mic?
You said that Davenport is an at-large district, but on the form you have it as director, comma, school board. Is that how you want us to write it?
Well, you're a director.
Okay, that's what I did. That's what I wanted to make sure, because it also
Yes.
talks about director district,
You
so I
can
just want
put
to make sure I
school
was
board
right.
member, but you're considered, you're called a director at the board table.
Okay.
Yes. Thanks for clarifying that. Any other questions? Oh, okay, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Okay, so it needs to be notarized. It can't be altered after it's notarized. Affidavits missing information listed below, this is on page 4, must be rejected. So if someone were to bring, let's say someone mailed me papers at the very last minute, and I had no way of getting a hold of them, I mean, if you brought it in and I saw that some of this stuff was missing, I wouldn't reject it. I would tell you, you need to fill this out. So that's why you want to get your papers in early to make sure that you have plenty of time to get it right. So it can be rejected if candidate's name, office sought, candidate's signature, and signature of a notary public is missing. I think it would be good to go over, there's a, okay, here we go on page 8. It talks about the difference, or page 7, it talks about the at-large districts and the director districts. So we are an at-large district. So it explains it right there if you want to read that later. Candidates may sign their own petition, assuming they are eligible electors of the school district. Candidates may begin collecting signatures at any time. So you can start collecting signatures right away. You can't file your paperwork with me until July 6th. But you can start, you can get everything ready and start getting your signatures. There is no limit on the number of nomination petitions one elector may sign for different candidates. And all signers must include the following information: a signature, the signature can be printed, the address of their residence. This must include a house number, a street name, and city. So make sure when people fill these out that they fill them out thoroughly, because if they don't, it's not going to be sufficient. Providing a post office box only is not sufficient. A signer who is homeless should describe where the signer lives or write homeless, and then the date of signing. And petition signers often use ditto marks because, you know, they see Davenport, 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 and that's fine to use that for the city or the date of signing. The use of ditto marks alone does not invalidate a signature. We have page 9 has a final checklist. I would make sure that you go through that checklist. It basically covers everything that you need to have submitted and everything that you need to do to have complete paperwork. And it also has recommendations for best practice. That's where it says file more than the required number of signatures in case there's anything that comes into question. You have to bind your nomination papers together. So the best practice is either use staples or a 3-ring binder. Staples are fine. You really don't need a 3-ring binder for that amount of paper. You have to file both the affidavit and the nomination petition at the same time, and then file as early as possible. And just real briefly, I will be giving you a receipt for your nomination papers. And you want to make copies for yourself so you can have copies of all your papers, because I take your originals. Okay? And just to let you know, I am on vacation July 17th, which is a Friday, that next week. So Brenda, she's Dr. Tate's administrative assistant, Brenda T., and she'll be happy to take your papers and give you a receipt in case you bring them by during that week, just to let you know that. Then about the campaign, we want to get you out on time here. Where did that go? What page is that in your IASB guide, candidate guide? There is I think it's page 8. It starts on page 8 of the IASB candidate guide with the 2 people in front. It talks about campaign finance and disclosure law. So you want to read that if you're planning on having over. It says candidates who receive contributions, make expenditures, or incur debts in excess of $750, including personal funds, must form a committee and file reports. So you really want to read that page 9 thoroughly. Do you want to talk about the campaign signs?
about that, what Mary was just talking about, that if you do raise money, and if you do not fill out those reports, you can be fined. And I was one. I was fined $30. I didn't file a report on time. So you have to kind of keep on top of that. And that money, if you run the first year and that money, you have it, it can continually sit there in your account until you are off the board, and then you can donate that to some organization if you want, or perhaps spend it before you on your last campaign. Another couple of little campaign hints, and Nikki probably has some also. When you're campaigning, you can't campaign on public property. You can't go into schools, for example, and campaign. When you put up signs, your biggest expense, by the way, is going to be signs if you have signs. Those signs, you have to be careful where you put those signs. You can't put those signs on public property. You can't put them on boulevards of homes. You have to put them on the lawns, lawn area, not the boulevard area. So there's certain places that you need to be careful about where you put signs, but you know that is not followed a lot. A lot of times you'll see signs by stop signs. That's a no. Well, anyway.
And then you want to talk about forums?
Oh, do you want to talk about it?
Sure. Yeah. Once you've filed your papers and the deadline's passed and you're an official candidate, then you are going to have the opportunity, in addition to putting up yard signs and doing different things to let people know who you are, there will be opportunities for you to participate in public forums that the community can come to and listen to what your thoughts and opinions are relevant to specific items before the school board or facing the district. Several other entities will host candidate forums. The ISEA, the Iowa School Education Association, they host candidate forums. United Neighbors has hosted candidate forums. You will more than likely be invited to interview in front of different groups, which may choose to endorse one or more candidates. So with those endorsements can sometimes come some monetary support of your campaign. So you will have opportunities to get your word and message out. As in regard to my own personal experience, the first time I ran, there were several seats open. It was a highly contested election because of the closing of Grant and Johnson schools, and there were 9 of us running that year. The next 2 times I ran, we were uncontested. So there were just the seated board members that had run for re-election, and as long as Mickey Mouse didn't get more votes than we did, we were good. And then the last time I ran again, I think there were 4 seats and 5 of us ran.
I think there was 5.
Yeah. So you'll see, there are any variety of ways that'll unfold. We'll see.
Any questions? And I'm happy to answer questions as you're filling your paperwork out. Just give me a call. I put my card in your folder. Something I did want to note here that I think is important is that ultimately it is the responsibility of the candidate to ensure that nomination papers are received by the school secretary. So, if someone were to mail them and I didn't get them and they just assume, it's the responsibility of the candidate to make sure that I have these in my possession by the deadline. I think I've covered everything.
Well, we've kept you 10 minutes over, but we hope this has helped in helping you with making your decision as far as being a candidate. We want to thank you for stepping up to the plate. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to contact Mary. And if you have a specific question about board responsibility role, I'm sure Nikki or myself will be available to share our thoughts with you. Thanks again.
Thank you.